You do not have to agree with me. I don't want you to agree with me. It's much more interesting if you don't, and it does not affect your grade whatsoever. And if you do get involved in things and you go out and get arrested or something, I'll do everything I can to get you out of jail, but I'm not going to give you a better grade for it. So just so we're clear on that. And they're doing this documentary on me, which embarrasses me highly. But really what they're trying to do is look at the movements that I've been a part of for the last 50 years through the lens of my life. And I know enough about the way people respond now that I know that that is valid. If it just weren't me, that people are more interested in people than in ideas initially. But once they get interested in the people, they'll move on to what the ideas are.
They were people who were labeled the rebels, the renegades, the outliers, people who weren't afraid to be called crazy, or in Ella Baker's case, difficult, in Anne Braden's case, red, dreamers that catapult us into a different place. She was born at a time in the Jim Crow South in which there was a very rigid script about what a middle-class white woman could be and do. And pretty much Anne Braden violated every page of that script with great pride.
It is written as a letter to Jesus, and it's titled A Prayer on My 13th Birthday. It begins, "Dearest Lord Jesus, I have today stepped out of the first phase of my life. Childhood is behind me, girlhood before me. I do not like this feeling of forever being banned from the beautiful, glorious land of childhood. I've had such a grand time in this beautiful land. Therefore, I put my hand to the plow today." I think she never took her hand off of that plow.
How do you explain for yourself the pathway of this little religious girl to that place?
Well, okay, I'll try to answer that. I always considered Alabama home. I grew up in Anniston. I don't know whether anybody here has ever heard of Anniston, Alabama. If you have, it's where they burned the Freedom Ride bus in 1961. Yeah. But I grew up there, and all the people that I grew up with really felt that they were in this privileged position because they were the most superior. There was a woman who would come one day a week and help Mother clean the house, and she would bring her daughter sometimes, and she would sit waiting for her in the kitchen. You know, I'd look at that, and they got our hand-me-down clothes, right? And I'd look at her, and she was fatter than I was, and they never quite fit. And I'd look at her, you know, and I know something happened to me when I looked at her. You just knew something was wrong. What I compare it to is photography. If you've ever done photography, you put the film in the development fluid, and it begins to come clear, but it's been there all along. My father always said his great mistake was educating me. He thought I got my radical ideas at Randolph-Macon Women's College, which confounded them some years later, too. But by that time, we were fighting the Nazis. And to a certain extent, people were aware that we were fighting their ideology of racial superiority. And it was hard to think about that and not begin to think about it a little bit at home. So I think those ideas were fermenting. I decided that I'd be a newspaper reporter. I went to Birmingham and worked on the newspaper there, and I covered the courthouse. In the mornings before I came downtown, I would call to see anything big happen overnight, because if there had, I'd have to skip breakfast usually and go on to the courthouse and get the details and get it into the first edition of the afternoon paper. When I would get downtown, I often stopped for breakfast and met a friend there, and the waitress was putting our food down on the table. And so he said, "Anything doing?" And I said, "No, just a colored murder." And I don't think I'd have ever thought anything about it if that black waitress hadn't been standing there. She was pouring coffee into our cups, and her hand was sort of shaking, but there wasn't an expression on her face. It was like she had a mask. And my first impulse was that I wanted to get up and go put my arms around her and say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean that. It's not that I don't think the life of your people is important. It's my newspaper that says what news is. And then I just suddenly realized I'd meant exactly what I'd said. Our society, the one that had nurtured us and been pretty good to us, been pretty good to me, our family, our friends, the people we loved, I never quit loving them, were just plain wrong. And that is painful. You really have to turn yourself inside out